Today on StockCharts In Focus, we're exploring all of the different ways to chart, analyze, and monitor relative strength around the site using ratio symbols. With a couple of simple tricks, you can actually compare the price history of one symbol relative to another. This is a fantastic way to see which stocks and funds are outperforming or underperforming the market, an incredibly important part of many technicians' toolkits, including my own. This is something that I have on my charts, a trick that I use on almost every single chart that I create, using ratio symbols to track relative strength. So we're going to get into all of that, lots to show you on today's show. Of course, you know what it is. It's all new. It's all here. It's StockCharts In Focus. All right, my friends, welcome to the show, StockCharts In Focus. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. If you're new to the show, welcome, welcome. If you've been joining us in the past, good to have you back. My name is Grayson Roze. I'm the Vice President of Operations here at StockCharts.com. As you know, we do this show every Friday. It's an opportunity to really drill into the site, dig into the tools and the features, show you around some tips, tricks, tutorials, and on a day like today, show you how I personally use stock charts in my own approach to the markets. So lots to cover on today's show as we dig into how to chart relative strength or price relative, really similar there, using ratio symbols. This is something actually I was reminded of recently. We had a business partner who was saying, I love stock charts. I love everything that you guys have. I just wish that I could compare the performance of one symbol to another one. And we had this funny exchange where I said, What do you mean? You can do that. Yeah, it's super easy. I do that on almost every chart that I create. And he said, "What? How do I do that? You got to show me how." So it reminded me that not everyone knows about our ratio symbol option that you have on stock charts. Again, an incredibly powerful tool, something that a lot of technicians out there use in their own toolkit, especially our contributors here at Stock Charts. David Keller, for instance, Tom Boley, Greg Schnell, Arthur Hill, a lot of our contributors are always talking about relative strength. John Murphy, for instance, talking about inner market analysis. That really is all based on relationships between two markets or price relative of one thing relative to another. So lots to cover on today's show. I think it's going to be a helpful one. If you're using ratio symbols already, this might be a great refresher, might give you some new ideas. If you're totally new to ratio symbols though, this is going to show you some powerful tips and tricks around the site. And like I said, I'm actually going to reach into my own toolkit, my own list of charts there, and show you how I use some of these ratio symbols in my own approach to the market. So lots to cover on today's show. Let's get right to it. So we are going to start here on the charts and tools page briefly. I want to tell you the flow of today's show. We're going to jump over to SharpCharts, show you how to create these ratio symbols over there. We're also going to jump over to ACP. But as you might have heard last week, we actually now have the ability to create price alerts using our technical alert workbench, our price alert workbench. We have the ability now to create price alerts for ratio symbols, something that we haven't had in the past. So we'll actually show you that really briefly. And I'm finding that ACP is actually one of the best places to create those price alerts for ratio symbols around the site. So we've got two different options. You can create them using the standalone price alert workbench, but you can also go over to ACP and actually create them dynamically just by clicking on your chart where you want to set an alert. So we'll show you how all that works on today's show. But first up, we are going to jump over to SharpCharts. I'm going to pull up a chart here of NVIDIA, hit go, and now we're off to the races. So we are on what we call the SharpCharts workbench. All of this is collectively called the workbench. Of course, one of the most popular tools on the site, something that you are probably very familiar with. For the sake of today's show, I've started us here with a very, very simple chart. Just kind of a stripped out version of what I use. This is really just candlesticks and a couple of moving averages here. We are going to show you though, from scratch, how to set up these ratio symbols. So again, just to give you a refresher, when we're setting up a ratio symbol, what we're doing is comparing one symbol to another one to track relative strength, price relative, however you want to phrase it. We're comparing the performance of one symbol relative to another. So the way that we do that in stock charts is we separate the two symbols that we want to compare with a colon. So up here in the top, or at the top of the bar up here, all we have to do is type in the symbol that we want, in this case NVDA, colon, whatever we want the benchmark to be, whatever we want the comparison to be. Now we can use this to compare how a stock or an ETF, for instance, is tracking relative to the total market. That's something that I use on all of my charts. I love to use VTI, which is the Vanguard Total Index, as the benchmark, so I can compare any chart I'm looking at, any symbol that I'm looking at, I can actually compare that to the total market. Because again, if we want to own things that are going to outperform the market, we have to be tracking whether or not they're outperforming the market. So we can do that using relative strength, using these ratio symbols. We're going to show you that in just a second. But you could also do this relative to any symbol that you want. If you want to compare one market to another one, like the John Murphy approach to intermarket analysis, or even if you want to get creative and compare something like Ford to Tesla, that might be a fun one to pull up. Any two symbols that you want to compare, all you've got to do is separate them by a colon in the symbol entry box. So I'll show you that in just a second. Before we do that, when we're tracking a ratio symbol, a traditional chart type like candlesticks can get a little mucky. So I'm actually going to come down here. I'm going to clear all of these moving averages. Now we've got a very, very stripped out chart, and I'm actually going to change this to be a solid line. You've got a couple of different options here. I like to chart my ratio symbols, price relative lines, as a solid line. In my case, actually, I really like to chart them as a solid thick line. You could do a dashed line, you could do dots, you've got tons and tons of different options. Even an area chart is actually kind of fun. In my case, I'm going to check solid thick line. And what we can see now is we have that same chart of NVIDIA charted as a solid thick line. I do have price labels on here still, but this is the standard chart, and instead of candlesticks, I've just got it as a solid line. Makes it a little easier to see when we convert this over to a ratio symbol. So to do that, I'm going to come up to this box up at the top, and you can see I've actually got autofill on there. When I type in this box, I've got NVDA to create a ratio symbol and compare how NVIDIA is tracking relative to, for instance, SPY, which would be the S&P 500 tracking ETF. All we have to do is type in colon SPY and hit enter. Now, you'll notice that this has changed a little bit. So we're looking at a chart that looks a little bit different, but the scale of this has changed as well. You can see all of the labels, all of the legends and everything has changed on this chart, because now what we're looking at is NVIDIA divided by SPY. So we can now compare the performance of NVIDIA versus the performance of the S&P 500. If this line is moving higher, that means that NVIDIA is outperforming the market. If this line is moving lower, that means that NVIDIA is underperforming the market. In this case, our market benchmark is the S&P 500. So we can see that again with these labels over here. So super simple. That's all you have to do to create these kinds of charts. Now we can see that we've got this in just sort of the mathematical format. We're just dividing the price of one symbol by the price of another. Personally, I like to actually take this one step further, because when I'm thinking about relative strength, when I'm thinking about these ratio symbols, I like to think of them in percentage terms. By what percentage is this stock or this fund outperforming the market, for instance? So we can come down here, and instead of tracking this as a solid thick line, we can actually change this to performance, one of the options that we have at the very bottom. When we do that in performance scale, that means that we're going to chart this as a percentage. So I'm going to hit update. And now what we can see is that exact same chart, the performance of NVIDIA relative to the S&P 500, but tracked as a percentage. So we can see over the last 1 year, in this case, this is a 1-year chart, we can see that NVIDIA has actually outperformed SPY by 45.61%. So in my mind, I like to track these as a percentage scale. So I actually come down and set my chart types to be performance. Now from here, you can really do anything that you want with this chart. You can change it to be, let's say, a 5-year chart. So how is NVIDIA tracked versus the S&P 500 over the last 5 years? Well, we can see over the last 5 years, it's outperformed the market by 588%, a huge, huge gain in NVIDIA and big outperformance in NVIDIA. So it's not just that NVIDIA has been moving higher, it's that NVIDIA has been heavily outperforming the market. That's what we want to track as technicians, as stock pickers. We want to buy things that are outperforming the market. So this kind of chart allows us to see that. So from here, though, we can really go nuts with this chart. We can add moving averages, we can add indicators, anything that we want to do with this chart, we can do. And again, we can change this symbol. So let's say we wanted to look at, let's come in here and do Apple versus SPY. Here we go. Over the last 5 years, we can see Apple versus SPY. Apple, not as big of an outperformance as NVIDIA, but still a beautiful gain, outperformed the market by 150%. Still something pretty special. So we can change these symbols really easily. And again, any symbol that you want to separate, we can do that. Any two symbols that you want to compare, we can do that simply by separating them with a colon. So let's say we wanted to compare stocks versus bonds, SPY versus TLT. Where there we can go. We can see over that same 5-year period, stocks outperforming TLT, the long bonds ETF. We can go nuts with this. Again, I mentioned Ford versus Tesla. That might be a fun one to look at. Over the last 5 years, Tesla absolutely trouncing Ford. But we can start to come in here and say, well, over the last 1 year, how has that relationship been? Wow. Ford's starting to tick up, starting to outperform Tesla. What about Ford versus SPY? How has that been outperforming the market? Okay, over the last year, Ford has actually been heavily outperforming the market. So using these ratio symbols, we can start to track these kinds of relationships, comparing one symbol to the next. Now, it's one thing to compare on a single chart like this, one symbol to the next, but how can we sort of build this into our process? That's what we want to address next. So I mentioned that this is something that I use every single day on my charts. Again, an incredibly important part of my process. So actually over here on the left, I'm going to open up my different chart styles. These are all of the different chart styles that I have saved into my account. Now there's a ton of them in here. I've got different chart styles for stocks, in different periods, in different sort of levels with different levels of indicators, things like that. There's a whole big organization. We could do an entire show on just my chart styles. But in this case, let's say we came to the the chart style that I like to use most frequently. I'm actually going to set this back to be NVIDIA. So we're just looking at the standard symbol. This is sort of the chart style that I typically use on a daily basis. And what you can see here is I have a standard chart of NVIDIA with my moving averages. I got volume. I've got some indicators on here like RSI and accumulation distribution, also the scooter. But at the very, very top of this chart, what I have is that same relative strength line of NVIDIA versus, again, I mentioned I like to use VTI, versus Vanguard Total Index, the total stock market, total US stock market. That's what that ETF represents. So I've got that line at the very top of all my charts. If you follow my work personally, you'll see that I have this relative strength line at the top of almost every single chart I look at on StockCharts. Because again, what I want to say is I want to find stocks that are moving higher or funds that are moving higher, but it's not enough to be moving higher. I need to own things that are outperforming the market, because if it's not outperforming the market, I might as well just own VTI, own the market. So anyways, I have this relative strength line at the top of every single chart I create. So I want to show you how you can do something very similar. I'm actually going to get us back to that chart that we had up at the very start of the show, the 1 year, very simple chart of NVIDIA. I've got a saved chart style for this. So we're looking at a 1 year chart, again, just candlesticks and a couple of moving averages. If you wanted to add in now the price relative line, the relative strength line for NVIDIA, it's very, very easy to do. All you got to do is come down to the bottom of the workbench, and under the indicators section, you've got two different options that you can play with. We've got price as an indicator. We also have price performance as an indicator. So we'll take a look at both of those. Let's start with price. So when you add the price indicator, you notice that you have a parameters box here that opens up. If you don't see any of this stuff, by the way, make sure that you've got that little green arrow opened up so you can see all of the advanced options, as we call them. In the parameters box here, if I just add the price indicator with a parameter of SPX, that's just going to add a simple price panel to this chart that tracks the S&P 500. So we can actually see what that looks. See what that looks like here. Now we've got a chart of the S&P 500 here below that chart of NVIDIA. What we want to track, though, is the relative strength line. We want to look at, again, NVIDIA versus the S&P 500 or versus VTI. In this case, let's actually do that VTI one just for fun, something different. So what we're going to do is we're going to come into this parameters box. We're going to type in, we've got two options here. We could type in NVIDIA versus VTI. That's going to track NVIDIA versus the total market. But what we actually want to do is make sure that we're setting up a chart that's going to work with any symbol, not just NVIDIA. We don't really want to hard code in NVIDIA to this chart. So what we're actually going to do is a little trick here. Instead of typing in NVIDIA relative to VTI, we're going to do a little workbench trick and do $symbol. Now, when we type in $symbol colon VTI or colon SPY, anything that you want to compare it to, what that's going to tell us, what that's going to tell the workbench is, hey, take the first symbol of this chart, sort of the root symbol of this chart, and use that as the thing that I'm comparing to VTI. So as we change the symbol, again, if we flip through from NVIDIA to Apple to Microsoft to Square, any symbol that we pull up, instead of having that hard-coded symbol in there, NVIDIA versus VTI, that we've got to go and change every single time, we can actually just use $symbol to make sure that that's tracking with whatever the main symbol on the chart is. So that $symbol trick, really, really helpful for when you're creating these price relative lines. So $symbol colon VTI. Now, I like to position mine above the price panel. That is just sort of my preference. If you want to put them below, you can do that. But in this case, we're going to put it above. Again, I like those solid, thick lines. So we're going to select that from this menu. And then I want to make this, let's do something fun. We'll make it blue here. Now, height is an interesting one. That's actually going to do the height of this price panel relative to the main price panel. So I'll set this at 0.5 and we can come down and mess with those later. And actually, if we wanted to put an overlay on this, we could even do, for instance, a moving average of this ratio. We've got that option here, but we'll save that for the future here. So I'm going to hit update, and what you're going to see is now we have NVIDIA versus VTI, again, the total US market. So that's that price relative line up here at the top. We've put that in blue, and we've set this as a price indicator. So again, it's just going to be taking the price of NVIDIA divided by VTI and spits out an actual number. So we can use this now to track relative strength. And again, because we use that $symbol trick, we can start to change the symbol. Let's say we wanted to do Apple. And now that's actually tracked with us. So we've got our price chart of Apple down below. We can see the primary price action, but we can also see the relative price action here. And as we flip to different symbols, this will follow us around. So every time we change the symbol, that $symbol trick is going to keep us locked in there. Make sure that we're tracking the right symbol. So if we wanted to change this, though, like we were showing earlier, we want to change it from a price metric to a price performance metric. We want to see this as a percentage. We can do that simply by coming down to the bottom and changing this from price to price performance. So some of these little settings will reset. The parameters stay the same when we make that change. The position stays the same, but we do have to reset our style. So I'm going to flip that back to solid. And this time, let's make it black instead. And just for fun, to show you how this height setting works, let's make this the exact same size as the price panel. We're going to make that price relative line really, really big. So we've got a couple of different options there. I'm going to hit update. And now you can see we have a much taller price relative space, but it's actually in percentage terms. So we can look at, in this case, Square versus the total market over the last 1 year in percentage terms. So Square over the last 1 year has outperformed the total US market by 73%. So again, this is something that I use on almost every single chart that I create. I can actually flip you through a couple of these. Here are some of my chart styles. Again, I have the very basic one I call level 0, which is just our standard candlesticks and some moving averages. But I have my sort of level 1 chart, which is really the simplest view that I typically look at. The simplest form that I'll look at a symbol in is the primary price panel plus that relative strength line, again, the symbol versus VTI. And I start to layer in other indicators on top of that. So for instance, I've got my level 1 down here. That's a 1-year chart. I've got all that in the name. I can actually come up here to my level 2 1-year chart, which I have saved as one of these style buttons. So you can see now I start to layer in a couple of other indicators like volume and RSI. But again, everything always includes that relative strength line. It's incredibly important for me. So I like to add that in there. I've got a level 3. Well, we can do the 2-year. That's actually the one that I typically look at, the level 3 2-year. So it's a 2-year chart. We've actually added in a couple more indicators at the bottom, accumulation distribution and the scooter line. But again, same concept. We've got that relative strength line right up at the top because it's very, very important. So hopefully that gives you a sense of kind of how you can start to use these ratio symbols. Again, anything that you want to compare, you can start to do that simply by separating those two symbols with a colon. We can do this for stocks. We can do this for ETFs. We can compare ETFs to ETFs, stocks to stocks, stocks to ETFs. We can use this for indexes. We can compare, for instance, how the NASDAQ has been tracking relative to the S&P 500. Really anything under the sun, these ratio symbols can help us track price relative. Now, I mentioned that I was going to jump over to some of my personal chart lists, show you how I actually use this on a daily basis. So let's do this right now before we hop over to ACP. I'm going to come over to the top menu, hit chart lists. This is going to take us over to all of the chart lists that I have in my account. And one of the most important chart lists that I have is my daily market evaluation list. This is something that I look at every single day. So I'm actually going to click into this in 10 per page view, and we'll just scroll through it really quickly to give you a sense, again, of how I'm using some of these ratio charts. For instance, here is my top level intermarket analysis chart. I'm using that price performance setting here for all of these different symbols in the main price area. But down below that, I've got a whole bunch of different ratio symbols as separate panels. So here we're looking at bonds versus stocks. Here we're looking at gold versus stocks. And here we're looking at commodities versus stocks. Again, relative to that VTI, the Vanguard Total Market Index. So this gives me a sense of how those different asset classes are performing relative to the total US equity market. We can scroll through here. We're looking now at the total world and the total international, as well as the total US. And again, same concept. I've got my ratio symbols down below. You can see I have these in price performance scale, but here we're comparing the total US stock market versus the total world. Here's the total US stock market versus the total international index. So as I scroll through this list, here we're comparing emerging markets versus developed markets. Here we're comparing mid caps versus large caps, small caps versus large caps, micro caps even versus large caps, all of the S&P groups there. So these ratio symbols, like I mentioned, incredibly important in my process. Here we're looking at growth versus value, dividends versus the S&P 500, momentum versus the S&P 500. I go nuts with these ratio symbols, as many other technicians do as well. Now, a fun chart actually that I can share with you up here in my weekly S&P 500 watch list, something that I call my ultimate S&P 500 chart. These are all my different sort of views of the S&P 500 that I have, but one that I love to look at every week is what I call my ultimate S&P 500 chart. So again, same concept. We've got the standard price plot area up here. This is a 2-year chart of the S&P 500 with a couple of moving averages on it. But below that, I've stacked all of these different key metrics that I want to watch, all using ratio symbols. So we've got most of these are, well, this top one actually is an index, but most of these are ratio symbols. For instance, you can see discretionary versus staples, offense versus defense. We've got growth versus value on here, high beta versus low volatility, momentum versus the S&P 500. And then we've got that same view, S&P 500 versus mid caps, large caps versus mid caps, large caps versus small caps. And we've also got the equal weighted version of the S&P 500 versus the cap weighted version, the standard version of the index. And at the bottom, we also have stocks versus bonds. So these ratio symbols, incredibly important. That's the point that I'm trying to make here. And actually, we have this daily market evaluation list in a shareable format. So if you're watching this on YouTube, we'll put a link in the description down below. You can actually get that list, get that whole list, save it into your own StockCharts account, and start to use that to create your own ratio symbols, your own ratio charts. Point is though, these ratio symbols are incredibly important in my process and the process of many other technicians out there as well. Now I'm going to briefly jump over to our price alert workbench because I want to jump over to ACP next, but I want to make sure that we show you how this price alert workbench looks with these ratio symbols. So again, something that we actually introduced last week. We've had price alerts for quite some time, but we've just given these price alerts a major revamp. One of the big things, we've changed the entire sort of back end, the engine that runs these price alerts. So you can now actually create price alerts for ratio symbols. So for instance, we were looking at NVIDIA versus SPY. We can come over to the price alert workbench. Let's say we wanted to track when NVIDIA makes a new relative high versus the S&P 500. We can come over here, we can type in NVIDIA versus SPY, click out of that box, and now we get that little mini chart of that ratio symbol. So from here, we can start to enter any level that we want. We can actually set price alerts to start to monitor some of these price relative relationships. So if you want to track, for instance, when a stock that you're following is actually breaking out to a new relative high versus something like the S&P 500 or the total market index, VTI again, you can actually do that using our new price alert workbench. One of the best ways I'm finding though to do that is through ACP. So let's jump over to ACP now, give you a tour of how this stuff works over there because it's very similar, but we'll also show you how you can create alerts in ACP for ratio symbols. We'll come up to the top of this page, open up this menu and select ACP. And from here, we're gonna stick with that NVIDIA chart. We're gonna pull up NVIDIA. So here we are in ACP, of course, our new interactive full screen advanced charting platform. We've been talking a lot about ACP on the show for quite some time. It just keeps getting better and better. New features coming to ACP almost on a weekly basis. We did our latest big version release, version 1.2, just a couple of weeks ago. So there's a ton that is new in ACP if you haven't checked it out in a couple of weeks. Lots in there now. We've got multi-chart layouts, multi-chart modes. We've got alerts in there. We've got a whole new market summary panel. You can run scans in ACP. Tons and tons of things, plus new indicators, all of that good stuff. Lots has happened in ACP. But the point of today is two things. One, we can create that same sort of chart style with those ratio symbols here in ACP, just like we were showing in SharpCharts. And then we're also going to show you how to create alerts really easily, price alerts for those ratio symbols in ACP. So let's take this chart of NVIDIA. We're going to run through the exact same process. We're going to actually convert this to a ratio chart. So over here on the left side, I'm going to actually clear out all of these indicators. All I got to do is hit these little trash can icons. Now we're back to our very simple, just pure candlesticks chart. And we're going to switch that to be a line. Now, ACP, a little bit different from SharpCharts. There are some differences. So if we wanted to switch this to be maybe a solid line, all we've got to do is click the label or click the gears icon next to the chart name. I'm going to click that label and I'm going to come down here to line settings. I'm going to change this to be a thick line. You can see that line is a little bit thicker. We could actually change this to have a different up color versus down color. So maybe we want up to be black, but maybe we want down to be red. So now we've got something similar to what we were looking at over in the SharpCharts world. So now we've got our very simple line chart, and all we've got to do again to convert this to be a ratio chart is look at NVIDIA versus, well, let's do VTI in this case. Now we're looking at NVIDIA versus the Vanguard Total Market, and again, looks really similar to what we had before. Same kind of concept. Now in ACP, we've got a lot more fluidity, so we can actually sort of scroll out, scroll in, zoom out, zoom in. We can scroll back and forth in time to see this. So we can track how NVIDIA has traded versus the total market throughout time really easily. If we want specific ranges, we can also come up to the top of the screen. Let's say we wanted 2 years. We can show that right here. Let's say we wanted to get back to 1 year. We can show that right here. So we've got lots of different options for working with these ratio symbols. But everything that we did before in SharpCharts, it also applies over here in the ACP world. Now, same concept here. We've got it charted as a straight line, simple line. But if we wanted to change this to be a performance line, all we've got to do is select performance from that menu right there. And again, now we're looking at this in performance scale. So it makes it really easy to track these relative relationships, price relative relationships here in ACP, again, using that same colon sign. So that is the trick. And again, when I said that this is incredibly important for me, I use this on almost every chart that I create. Well, I can show you that in ACP. So the same concepts apply. We can add a price or price performance indicator to our charts here in ACP, use that same $ symbol trick to track those relative strength lines on our charts. So for instance, if I go to my daily level 2 chart, we can see it looks pretty similar to what we were looking at before. We've got our relative strength line up at the very top with NVIDIA versus VTI. So easy to track that stuff there. And again, in the parameters box, all I've got to do is enter $ symbol versus VTI. So really simple to create these charts and add these sorts of relative strength lines to your charts. Now, let's get back, though, to our straight relative strength line. I'm going to get back to that really quickly. Delete these, and I'm going to change this to be a solid line. So now we're looking at NVIDIA versus VTI. Let's do that over, how about year to date? Well, we'll scroll out because we need a little more price history. Let's say we wanted to track, like we were saying, NVIDIA versus VTI, we want to track when this stock makes a new relative high. So again, we can create price alerts in ACP really, really easily. Over on the left side of the screen, all we've got to do is come down to this little alert icon, the little bell icon, open that up. And because we now have the ability to track these ratio symbols using the price alert workbench, you can see when I open that up, these little crosshairs turn on, and I've got the horizontal and the vertical line. Well, if I wanted to set an alert for when NVIDIA makes a new relative high, all I've got to do is hover over the chart at that spot, click, and you can see now I've entered that in here. That price level, that ratio symbol level has been entered into the price box for me. I can choose crosses above or crosses below. In this case, we want to make sure that we're tracking when NVIDIA hits a new relative high, so we want to be set on crosses above here. We choose our notification type, website, email, or text message. Let's say we wanted all 3 of those, and from there, all we got to do is hit Save Alert. So now we've created a new price alert in our account that is tracking when NVIDIA makes a new relative high versus the total US market. So again, this is actually one of the easiest ways to create price alerts on StockCharts now. Just coming over to ACP, pulling up your charts, and clicking on those charts exactly where you want it. Let's say we wanted to track if NVIDIA starts kind of breaking down below some important levels. Looks like this is actually a pretty important level, sort of relatively speaking. We can do the same thing here. We can set an alert at that 2.47 level. I've clicked the mouse there. We can change this to be crosses below. And now if this relationship, once I hit save, if this relationship crosses below that level, we're going to get an email, a text, and a website notification. So again, ACP has made alert setting, price alert setting very, very, very easy. You can do that simply by clicking on your charts wherever you want to set them. So a pretty cool feature there. Point is though, these ratio symbols, there's a ton that you can do with them. I love to incorporate them into my charts. Again, like I was showing you, pretty much every chart that I create on StockCharts has that price relative line at the top. One of the most important indicators for me as I'm flipping through different stocks, different ETFs, building up my watch list, tracking my portfolio, all of that good stuff. So I know that we covered a ton on today's show, lots to show you. Hopefully you've got some good stuff to explore. Remember, to help get you started, we're going to put that link down in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube to my daily market evaluation list. You can actually pull that up, save it to your own account. That's going to give you a lot of those different ratio symbol charts that have ratio symbols on them. That'll get you started with those, bring them into your own account. But it's pretty simple to create these. Remember, all you got to do to compare any symbol, separate it by a colon, and you can chart that on any of our platforms. ACP, SharpCharts, anywhere around the site. You can even now create price alerts for those ratio symbols. Pretty exciting stuff. I want to thank you again for joining me on today's show. Hopefully this has helped you see some things you hadn't seen before, some tips, tricks, tutorials. Again, that is our mission here on StockCharts In Focus, helping you get more value out of the site than ever before. If we're doing that, if you leave saying, hey, I'd never seen that before, then we've done our job. So again, I want to thank you for joining me on today's episode. Remember, we do this every Friday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on StockCharts TV, also up on our YouTube channel, and at StockChartsTV.com, our new on-demand platform. You can watch the show there as well, in addition to all of our other incredible content on StockCharts TV. My name is Grayson Roze, Vice President of Operations here at StockCharts. I will see you soon for another episode of StockCharts In Focus, of course, next Friday. But until then, chart on, my friends.
Hey guys, Dave Keller here with StockCharts.com. Thanks so much for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, and we hope you did, hit the like button right below. Also, we have so much new content every day. Consider subscribing to the channel. Just hit the subscribe button in the video or right below. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Have a fantastic day.